All right, the final topic in the sport participation behavior basics is the decision-making process. And of course, remember we already talked a little bit about this decision-making process. Um, it includes individual differences, social factors, and situational factors, and we discussed all of those. Now we want to talk about the actual participant decision-making process. The decision-making process is typically thought of as a five-stage process, and your book has a process that looks very, very similar to this. Of course, it starts with problem recognition. That is perceiving a need, a need to participate in a sport. Maybe I participate in a sport for a variety of reasons, but maybe it's for health reasons. Maybe it's because my friends are. Maybe it's because I need to get out and get some fresh air. It could be almost anything. But the idea is that I realize that I have become interested in participating in a sport, and as a result, perhaps buying a particular sporting good. Next, I go and I go through the information search. Maybe I go to the sporting goods store and look at alternative products. For instance, I might decide that I want to start running, and so I go and I look at running shoes, and I look at running shorts, and I look at running togs, and I look at et cetera, et cetera. Or I decide that I wanted to join a gym, and so I go up online and I look at the different gyms that are available locally and how much they cost and what sort of features they have, that sort of thing. So I identify what my alternatives are. I then go through and I actually try to evaluate the alternatives. So what are the strengths of someone like Lifetime Fitness compared to 24-hour fitness, compared to Las Vegas athletic clubs, compared to Anytime Fitness, or whatever else the alternatives might be. And so I search information and then I evaluate that information, and eventually I decide which of those alternatives I am going to purchase. So I make a purchase decision, and then I go to the gym and I use the gym, and I have a post-purchase behavior. That is, I enjoy the use of the gym. I enjoy the attributes of the gym, the features of the gym. I enjoy the classes. Whatever I evaluate, or I decide that this was not a very good purchase and I need to get out of this contract and go to a different gym. So we have this purchase decision process, and of course, as marketers, we're interested in this process because we need to try to steer potential customers through this process in a way that results in them purchasing our particular product. Now, this process includes sort of three different potential views of decision making. The first view on decision making is that this is a high involvement purchase decision. And of course, and the idea that it's a high involvement purchase decision is that consumers are information processors, and consumers are information seekers, and consumers rationally evaluate the brands, and consumers seek to maximize their satisfaction, so they're willing to spend a large amount of time looking at the alternatives. Things like lifestyles, personality, demographics are closely tied to consumer behavior because they help create the consumer's identity. And the idea behind a high involvement view of decision making is that it is a very rational, thought out view. You would never buy a gym membership without touring 3 or 4 or 5 gyms, just as you would never buy an automobile without driving 4 or 5 different alternatives. Now, you know that is probably not exactly the way that this situation will unfold. You'll go to 1 or 2 gyms, and if you see one that you like, you probably will just go ahead and buy a membership there. You have something that you really want to experience, and that you've already have a preconceived notion of what you think might be the best alternatives. A second approach to looking at this sort of decision making is a low involvement decision making process. And that is consumers learn information at random. Consumers are information gatherers, but not information seekers. That is, they find information out, they're thinking about joining a gym. They hear other people talking about gyms. They might see a couple of commercials on TV about different sorts of gyms and fitness centers. Um, and so then you then say, I think I'm going to try that gym. And so and in some gyms they have trial memberships and those sorts of things for you, so you get a chance to actually go in and see how you like it. Consumers tend to buy first and then evaluate their decisions afterwards. And consumers are sort of satisficers. That means I join a gym, and if the gym is okay, then I stay there. I don't go in and say this gym's okay, but I would like something even better. In many situations, even purchasing a gym membership, which might result in quite a bit of expenditure over the course of a year, for instance, if you join something like Lifetime Fitness, is really still a low involvement decision. And then we have this adaptive view of a consumer and decision making. And this is the notion that consumers learn information as they experience life, and they try to make sense of the information by making generalizations, and so they create heuristics and views and opinions based on generalized information. Consumers try to be consistent whenever risk is high, and they try to do the best they can given the uncertainties in the environment. And for them, experience and situational factors are the most critical influencers of consumer behavior. And of course, I have here a little chart that shows the notion between high and low involvement. It doesn't include the adaptive consumer, because the adaptive consumer basically just lets information come to them, and they experience the information, and they process it on a very random basis and then make decisions. I know that you have friends that are like this, that you can ask them a question and they have a strong opinion even though they probably have no experience in that particular area. So some of the distinctions between high and low involvement are the number of brands examined, the number of sellers considered, the number of product attributes evaluated, the number of external sources, and how hard you search for information. These are all examples of some of the things that separate high and low involvement decision making. So some examples of some low involvement things are things like common athletic tape, socks, T-shirts, those things. Those might be low involvement purchase decisions. A marketing manager would want to maintain product quality, avoid stockouts, and think about using some of these products as traffic builders. They would argue that they should reduce cognitive dissonance with ads, and also maybe money back guarantees, those sorts of things. High involvement would be things like maybe a new gym membership or a tennis racket, running shoes, or maybe even a new golf putter. Consumers tend to seek information. They look at comparative ads. If you want to try to reach these people, you might use endorsers. And of course, if you go to some place that sells golf equipment like Golf Galaxy or the PGA Superstore, you'll notice that they have plenty of salespeople in the store to use their personal selling skills to see if they can get you to buy something. Another way to look at this whole decision-making process is to use something that I'm sure that you've seen in your Principles of Marketing class, in your Market Planning and Analysis class, and in your Buyer Behavior class. And this is the famous multi-attribute utility model of decision making, sometimes referred to as the MAU model. That is using the acronym MAU, MAU models. And so the way this works is that we consider every purchase as a bundle of attributes or benefits sought. So here I have an example of I'm looking for a new fitness tracker. And when I go to look for new fitness trackers, I first go up and perhaps I look at a couple of websites and they talk about the things that are important when you look for fitness trackers. And so I say to myself, what are the things that I'm really interested in a fitness tracker? Well, I'm interested obviously in the cost. I want the display to be something that's going to be easy to read. I want a tracker that's going to be easy to use. I want one that's going to be accurate. I want one that's not going to that's going to be tough. In my case, toughness includes being waterproof. And then perhaps I'm interested in things like battery life. All right, and so what I do is I look at these particular attributes, or which are the common attributes that people might evaluate fitness trackers on, and I ask myself, which of these are the most important to me? So, how important is, on a scale of 1 to 5, where 5 is extremely important and 1 is not important at all, how important is cost? How important is display? All these sorts of things. And then when I get done doing that, my next step will be to go through and evaluate each of the alternatives that I'm looking at on those attributes. And so the idea here is I'm going to decide which are the most important attributes, and then I'm going to evaluate the alternatives on those attributes. So let's see what this looks like. All right, so here I put in the importance weights. Now, your importance weights might be very different than my importance weights here. So perhaps for you, maybe cost is a 5 and toughness is a 3 and accuracy is a 4 and ease of use is important. So the point here is that each individual is different in terms of the importance weights. But I have to go through and calculate the importance weights. The next thing I do is I evaluate each of the alternatives on those attributes. And so here I have the Fitbit Charge 4, and I've evaluated it relatively good on cost and display, but extremely good on accuracy. If I look at the Amazfit BIP, the display cost and ease of use are their strengths. If I look at the Huawei brand 3, it's the display and the toughness and the battery life that are their biggest features. And the Garmin Vivo Smart 4, their strengths include accuracy and toughness. And so I've evaluated these now, and now the question is, how do I decide which one of these is the one that I think is the best version for me? Well, this part of the process is where I go in and I multiply the importance weight by the evaluation. So let's take Fitbit Charge 4, for example, here. So I want to make an overall score for my evaluation of Fitbit. So I look at the cost and I multiply the cost by my evaluation of cost for Fitbit. So the importance is a 3 and my evaluation is a 3. So my score for Fitbit on cost then is 3 times 3 or 9. For display, it would be 4 times 3 or 12. For ease of use, it would be 2 times 3 or 6. For accuracy, it would be 5 times 5 or 25. And then 15 and then 12 for a total score of 79. I do that for each brand, multiplying the importance weights by the evaluation of that particular attribute for that particular model. And I add up all my scores. And you can see here that when I add up the scores in this case, that it's the Huawei, that Brand Pro 3, that is the highest evaluation and the one that I then would go out and purchase. Marketers love to use this sort of a strategy because what it does is it allows us to look and see how our brands are evaluated compared to others. Two values here is one is it allows us to decide to find out what the important attributes are for each individual consumer and how we stack up to the competition. For instance, if I'm Amazfit, I know that I've got a superior display. But people don't view me as having an accurate, tough fitness tracker. And so I might want to try to improve people's perceptions of the accuracy and toughness of my particular tracker. On the other hand, if I'm the Garmin Vivio Smart, I find that ease of use is a particularly low spot for me. And so I might want to go in and think about how I can convince people that it's easier to use than this. And I also, if you take a look, the display obviously is lacking compared to the other alternatives. And so if I'm Garmin here and I'm looking at trying to improve my overall evaluation compared to the other alternatives, I can either try to convince people that my watch is easier to use and that it's got a better display, or I can try to fix those two items, or I could go in and take a look at something like display, where I have the lowest evaluation on display, and display is a relatively important attribute, 4 out of 5. So one of my alternatives is to try to convince people that the display is better or improve the display. The other alternative is try to reduce the importance on display. That is, try to get people to understand that display is not anywhere near as important as toughness and accuracy, where I do very well. So once we make the decision, we purchase the watch, the last step in the decision making process is, what are sport consumer behaviors? Well, of course, it's the buying behavior. That's certainly part of sport consuming behavior. The second thing that sports marketers want to be interested in is the consumption and use behaviors. That is, how do people consume the sport and the products that we use to help our enjoyment of that sport. And then finally, what about the disposal behaviors? What happens when when I buy something new and I have old stuff left over? In many cases, in many families, some of those things get handed down. In other cases, perhaps they're sold on eBay as slightly used. In terms of golf clubs, many times they're traded in on new golf clubs. And so, while we think of purchase behaviors for sports consumers, also think about consumption and use behaviors, and think about disposable behaviors.